At this time, it is my pleasure to introduce your presenter, Adam Higgins. For over a decade, Adam functions as a marketing and business analyst for nonprofit associations. In 2013, Adam joins HighRoad Solution as a technical project manager to manage e-marketing and digital communication implementations. Throughout Adam's career, he bridges the gap between the business units and the information technology department. Adam began his career at the Los Angeles County Department of Community and Senior Services, where he developed and managed databases for thousands of workforce participants. Moving on to Western Growers in 2006, Adam managed the Enterprise Association Management System, AMS, and oversaw web development, design, and analysis for websites. Adam Higgins is a graduate from California State University, Dominguez Hills. He's a Los Angeles native and now resides in Atlanta, Georgia, with his wife and son. Adam is one of the few men that enjoys wearing a suit and tie to work. And now I will turn the program over to Mr. Higgins. Please begin.
Thank you. Thank you for that introduction. Right. Today we're talking about powerful EPCs. And like you said, I used to work at Western Growers. And when I first signed on with HighRoad as a client, the EPC was just this mere application to check off interest and preferences or, in theory, prevent opt-outs. But the EPC has clearly evolved over the last few years, and the EPC has now become this really robust application. You can deliver dynamic content. You can deliver different user experience type of interactions on the web. So the EPC has clearly evolved to something well beyond just preventing preferences or opt-outs, I should say, and to something that you can gauge interest from your user base. And so today, we're really going to talk about leveraging that power of the EPC, using that data that's inside your AMS to put together some really robust campaigns, some marketing strategies. But before we get started with that, I want to kind of take it back to square one and kind of understand the fundamental application of the email preference center and why we got started and how we kind of evolved into this powerful, robust system that we have in place. Initially, the email preference center started off merely to comply with CAN-SPAM, right? We had to give members a mechanism to opt out receiving future emails, right? And you had to do that promptly, right? So what we did was we created this application that, it was synced with your AMS, and so when somebody opted out of a communication, it automatically opted them out within your AMS, and that was good because now you're complying with CAN-SPAM compliance. And then Castle came along, right? And we needed a mechanism to also allow users to express consent. And so they had to explicitly say, hey, I want to receive communications from you. But over time, we really started to build some really robust applications beyond, just the normal, opting people in and out of your communications. And so typically members do the following, right? They either unsubscribe for your communications or they report you as spam. And so what we wanted to do was kind of allow people to modify their preferences, right? Modifying the preferences being the one that is greater than unsubscribe and report as spam, right? Those two options is kind of like, oh no, people are opting out of our communication. So we really wanted to give users the power to select interests. And so as it evolved, what we did was we were seeing that when you gave power to the users to select interests, we got a healthy membership marketing list, right? We were able to have these really robust lists to kind of gauge our segmentation within the email platform. But then as we started to see, we can now apply technology with the data that we were getting from the email preference centers and really create these unique and dynamic user experiences with the AMS data. And so what we came to with some marketing automation strategies, right? You can now marry up some of the interest areas with some triggered actions to allow you to do some things while you work, right? You don't have to go inside the email platform to distribute emails anymore, right? You can have technology do that for you, and you can leverage that. You can leverage that on your own. And then we also were able to use hyper-personalized email campaigns. Okay. It looks like I am showing the wrong screen, so let me pause this real quick. And let me know, everybody, if you can see my screen. Is it looks good? All right, perfect. Great. All right, awesome. So what we're going to do today is really kind of walk through some of the powerful things that you can do from a UX perspective, a user experience perspective, as well as illustrate some of the powerful things you can do with the data, right? Not only is the EPC a powerful mechanism, but you can actually create some really beautiful user experiences to your members. All right, so the first thing I want to cover is branding, right? I think you guys all get this. I think everybody on this call, everybody on this webinar kind of understands branding. We're all marketing people. And so I see a lot in the space that sometimes people will create a preference center, but it would just be something vanilla, blank, and not have that cohesive look and feel from your website, to your email preference center. So make sure that you kind of include your brand guidelines along the way so that you can have that cohesive experience from their website to your email preference center. Now, here's a good example, right? So I created this email preference center for Food Insight. It's the International Food Information Council Foundation, and what we did here was try to bring along some of the same colors and the fonts along the way throughout the email preference center. So you can see the greenish tones are mirrored in the email preference center, as well as some of the purple highlights that you can see as well too. What we do typically is strip out some of the items that we want to prevent people from clicking away from the email preference center. So typically we remove the navigation elements so that we can keep the focus on the email preference center, because you want to keep that interactivity within the email preference center so they're not just branching off and doing other things, because sometimes people get distracted by flashy lights like myself, and if I see something at the top and I'm like, ooh, that looks exciting, I might click off, and now I failed to complete what I came to do. So it's a standard practice when developing landing pages. So stripping the navigation elements away, but still maintaining that brand and look and feel of the organization's guidelines. Now, responsive has been a topic discussed widely over the last couple of years, and I remember there was a List Apart article a while back. This was probably like 5 years ago, and I read the article about doing responsive design for my website, and I was like, are you serious? This seems like a lot of work. But now this is pretty much a standard practice, right? You have to create responsive websites. A website that is not responsive is pretty much outdated. And looking at the next generation, the millennials, if you ever seen them communicate, and they're out and walking around, they're all on their phones with their heads down, right? So email on phone is growing. I mean, it's at 50% now, but I think that number is going to exponentially increase to nearly 100% pretty soon, because everybody has a mobile phone. It's in our society now. And so what you got to do is create a cohesive experience from mobile phone to desktop, right? And sometimes it just doesn't mean that, everything gets, truncated down into a mobile phone. You have to look at the elements that are within the design, right? So check boxes, input boxes, buttons, making sure everything is sized properly for mobile. And so here's an example. Here's a fictitious organization that I have. It's called the NFFA. Don't laugh at me. It's the National Fantasy Football Association. And so here's an email preference center that I mocked up for that association. And as you can see, this is on a desktop, a wide screen, so I don't have to have each of the sections stacked on top of each other, right? So I can leverage that full width of the desktop so that I can have two columns to kind of eliminate the need of scrolling, right? But as I move on to mobile devices, on a tablet, and tablets are pretty big in the association space. So anytime I go to a conference, everybody's on a tablet. And so you want to make that experience specific to the tablet, right? But then as you move over to a different breakpoint on the mobile device, you can see that it gets smaller and you move the things around so that it can fit within the frame of a mobile device. The scrolling gets a little longer with the mobile device, and so that may go into consideration with your design as well. Maybe you remove some of the description text to kind of eliminate the need to scroll, but I think for the most part with mobile devices, people are used to actually scrolling. I think both with mobile, with the tablets and the mobile phones. But keep in mind, so when you're designing, an email preference center, you have to consider these, probably 3 different breakpoints and making sure that the experience is unique to each of these devices. Okay. One creative way to illustrate messages to make people do certain actions is modal pop-ups, right? And so what a modal is, and I don't want to get too technical, it's driven by jQuery and JavaScript, and basically it's web geekness, if that's a word, to allow interactivity on websites, right? And so you can fire off these pop-up boxes within the application to kind of generate a specific action. Because what it does is it grays the entire website out, and so that you're only focused on that one element. And with this example for snow sports, they have Canadian members, right? And so they want to get express consent from their members that they being SIA, to send emails to them. So right up front, we have data within their database that is saying that this person hasn't expressed consent. So you're leveraging that data. That's the power with these EPCs. You're leveraging that data that's within the AMS, and you're saying, hey, if they haven't expressed consent, please ask them this question, and we want them to do this right away. We don't want them to peruse the email preference center without selecting this selection. So it forces you to do a specific action, and so that's one way that you can, if you have or need, some Castle implementation, this is one way that you can implement those Castle campaigns. Here's another example with a modal pop-up, and this one was within the descriptions of each of the preferences. You can view samples of the emails, right? And so sometimes I see these on email preference centers. When you click on the view sample, it either takes you to a different page or the page within itself, and that's just bad UI or user experience, because now you're moving that person away from what you want them to do. And so with the modal pop-up here, you can still keep them on the same page, and then they can peruse the email and look through it, and then click the X at the top, and they're still on the page. So this is a good way to keep people on the same page and delivering a message to do a specific action. Now, you can do this with a number of different things, right? You can do this with with pop-up ads, right? So imagine this. Imagine that you know this specific customer is interested in annual meeting activities, right? And so you have, let's say, an early bird discount on annual meeting activities. Well, you can pop up a modal box and say, hey, I know you're interested in annual meeting activities. Today there's, you know, a 25% early bird discount. Or we see that you haven't subscribed to the blog. You know, would you like to subscribe to the blog now? You know, and how frequent would you like to receive those blog notifications? So it's a good way to get information, you know, to get information that you don't already have within your AMS, as well as maintain them on the same site and not, you know, take them off on another course. All right. And so asynchronous functionality, that is really a technical word, and don't be scared by it. It really means that you're doing form actions without reloading the page, right? And we typically call this in-house as one-page application. That's like our nomenclature internally here. And reason being, one-page application means that you're staying on that same page throughout the duration of your experience. And so a standard workflow for EPCs that do not have one-page application functionality is that you land on a page and then you click a submit button at the bottom. And then that sends you to a page that says, hey, thanks for you know, submitting your preferences, right? And so it moves you along a course of several pages. Well, with one-page applications, you stay on that page for the duration of your session. And so what this does is it increases engagement on the page, right? It allows the user to interact with the page actually more efficient, right? Because they can stay on there and check and uncheck. If they make a wrong decision, they can easily uncheck, and that updates the database real time. And so with this type of functionality, you do have to keep in mind that you have to have some type of messaging to the end user, because if you're doing this asynchronous functionality, you want to make sure that they know they're doing some updates, because sometimes they'll say, wait a minute, am I updating this form or not, right? So make sure you have proper messaging when doing asynchronous functionality. And so here's an example. All right, when you click a preference and you subscribe to something, you'll get a GIF that says subscribing, right? So that's that messaging that lets you know that something's happening, right? And you have the same when it's unsubscribing, right? So if you uncheck the box, you now are updating the database real time, right? You're updating Personified, NetForm, Aptify, you know, Salesforce, any of these applications real time. And that data is getting translated, and you don't have to go to another page. You can keep interacting with this page without moving along to another page. And so this is where the efficiency comes into play. And the same goes for opt-outs as well. You don't want the person to just, you know, uncheck to opt themselves out. You want to make sure that you get a confirmation, right? So here you check the box, you confirm your opt-out, and then voila, that person is opted out. But so what I like about this functionality is that you stay on the same page for the duration of the session. We do tend to see that, you know, people or organizations with older demos tend to struggle with this, and so we've done pseudo kind of submit buttons at the bottom of the page to illustrate that, you know, there is a submit button, but as our organizations get younger and younger over the next few years, this type of functionality is probably going to be kind of standard, right? They're going to expect this type of functionality. And so invariably, I'm on calls quite a bit, right? And so I'm doing these implementations, and I get this question all the time. I said, how many preferences should we put on our EPC? And we're we're all remote, right? So you can't see my reaction. So I kind of do the Michael Jordan, like, I don't know. But what I do know is that you need to find the right balance, right? Too little of preferences doesn't really allow you to differentiate the member, right? Or that member, when they go to the page and they've seen a communication and then now they want to update their preferences, it's like, wait a minute, that communication that I just got doesn't reflect what's on the EPC, right? And so you want to make sure that you're kind of honoring that as well. So the communications that you're sending out, you want to make sure that you have representation of what communications are on your EPC. And what happens when you have too little is that you have a really small segmentation strategy, right? If you only have 2 or 3 preferences, you really are not kind of delineating your membership too well, right? But if you have too many, on the other hand, this really inundates the member, right? You can if you have 65 preferences on an EPC, then the member might just say, whoa, this is too much, I'm gonna just go ahead and opt out, right? And with that case too, on the other side of that as well, is that it's going to be too granular, right, for you to even honor, right? Unless you have some type of automation strategy in place, or a hyper-personalized email that's being automated via Newsletter Express Plus, it's going to be very difficult to honor that segmentation, with the exclusions per se, if somebody opts out when you have 65 or so preferences. But too many, it's hard to say what is too many. I threw out that number 65. That might be really high, right? But I think really what it comes down to is the presentation as well, right? And so what I really like with Home Depot, and I just moved to Atlanta, got a new house and so forth, and so I'm trying to do the manly thing and fix up certain things around the house, and so Home Depot is kind of like home, if you will. And I looked at their email preference center, and I was pretty impressed by the way they laid out their preferences, right, or what they're calling interest. And so here, there's 16 different preferences on this page, and it didn't even feel like it was 16 preferences on the page. And what was also cool, they put me into a bucket, right? I got to express where my skills were, right? I'm not quite the expert, DIY man, but I'm in the middle somewhere. And so I get to, that flag gets updated in their database, obviously, right? And so now they have a good demographic field for them to market to me specific, DIY tasks that are intermediate level, right? I'm now receiving communications on DIY things that are on the intermediate level, right? Tiling floors and so forth, okay? And so, and also look at how they presented the preferences. They gave you a good visual to each of the elements that are on the page, and it was easy to work through. And so you have tabs at the top that pretty much delineate the type of person you are, whether you're doing home improvement, gardening, or you're a professional contractor. So there's a lot of preferences within this email preference center, or this interest, but the way they presented the information didn't come over as overwhelming or daunting. It was pretty easy to fill out. And so a good way to do this is with toggles and accordions, right? So if you have a lot of preferences and you want to honor that granular segmentation, you want to get to know every bit of your constituents, toggles is your best way, right? So on the ASE newsletter, or EPC, I should say, they have a lot of preferences, but it's not as daunting as it appears because they have the toggles on the side, right? So as you click a checkbox, or I should say the plus button off to the left, it expands, and then you have a set of preferences under each of the labels, right? So if you went to business operations, you get this list. Finance, you get in this, and so on and so on. And so with this setup, it's actually connected to their taxonomy within their CMS. So, these labels are being generated from their content management system. So it's a part of a larger hyper-personalized email system. And so this is not, they can do this because they can honor it, right? And so toggles is probably your best way to go if you have a lot of information. Right? And so personalization with email preferences, right? So you can show and hide certain preferences based on demographic data, right? And so what this does is allow you to kind of customize the user experience on the email preference center, along with, like I was saying before, with the pop-ups or discount ads that you can display as well, because you know your customers so well. You can also, limit the amount of preferences they see based on demographic data, right? And so you can also illustrate member benefits this way, right? So if a non-member comes to your page, you can display certain preferences that only non-members can have access to and only members can have access to. And so they look at the items that are grayed out and say, hey, that looks like an interesting newsletter I would like to receive. They won't be able to opt themselves in, but there is a button so that they can sign up for membership, and now it puts them through a different funnel along the lines of getting new members. So it's almost a recruitment tool as well to get non-members to convert over from non-members to convert to members. And so here's an example. This was AABB, and so they have two newsletters: the AABB Weekly Report and the AAB Assessor Update. And these two preferences are not available, or I should say newsletters are not available for non-members. So as Ron McGrath comes to the page, since he's not a member, he will not have access to these newsletters, nor will he be able to interact with these preferences. It's just a way to illustrate that, these are member benefits. But you can still view the sample, so they can click on the sample, and this was in a previous example where, it popped up and it was the actual newsletter. And so they can preview that newsletter and see, I think this is something that I would like to read, and this is something that is valuable to me. Maybe I should become a member. And so it puts them through a different funnel, and now that person is a member. Okay? So personalization, I think, is key, and there's a lot of different ways that you can do personalization with the EPC. It doesn't have to be, member and non-member. It can be committee-based. It can be different demographic fields that are within your AMS and your CRM to kind of display different content to the user, right? And so you have a lot of data within that AMS to do personalization, I believe. I've seen a lot of databases in the last year, and you guys got a ton of data, and that ton of data that you can really leverage and take advantage of it, and really create some unique experiences for your members. And there's a slew of different things that you can do, but membership, non-member, non-member is probably one of the easiest things to do. But again, I would take a look at your data and kind of figure out some of the things that you can leverage inside your database. Here's an awesome one, right? Language detection. So this is inside. This is Kiwanis, and they're a Personify customer. And so within Personify, there's a flag that specifies what language this constituent speaks, right? And so why bring them to an email preference center that is all English if they speak Spanish, right? And Erica here is my colleague, speaks Spanish, right? And so when she comes to the email preference center, instead of saying city, it says ciudad, and I pretty much botched that right there, so I'm not going to speak any more Spanish. But instead of state, it has the state variation of for Spanish. So you can see that this is a custom email preference center, or I should say user experience for Erica, right? And so now she can read through the preferences, and so it would be completely daunting for somebody that is only Spanish speaking, to come to a preference center that was all English and try to navigate through it. And so they're giving a really customized personal experience to this constituent. And I think this is one of the awesome ways. And I think they have, what, 5 to 10 different, types of variations of this email preference center. And it's all based on data, right? And it's the data that's inside the database that's dictating what this person is going to see when they come to the email preference center. All right, and there's another advantage with using your data within the AMS as well, right? So you can use the data within your AMS to generate dynamic preferences. And when I say dynamic, I mean that everything on the email preference center, if you have like something that's a Generation 1 email preference center that I had when I was at Western Growers, pretty straightforward. You had your preferences on there. Now we can actually say, we'll look at the preferences within inside your AMS and then just bring those onto the email preference center. And we won't hard code those onto the HTML template. We will allow you to manage your preferences within inside your AMS, right? The titles, the descriptions, and so forth. And just bring those in. So if you have a new preference, you add that into either your opt-in or opt-out interest area, your topic code, or the new mailing list in that form, right? You add that in, and then now that appears on your email preference center. And if you have to update a title or change a description, all that is done in the AMS, and you're kind of using the AMS as a CMS, right? It's almost like a content management system as well, right? So you're really leveraging the power of your AMS to generate some kind of routine task that we have a lot to always have to update preferences over time and or change things here and there, change a date. This is the 2014 annual meeting, notification. So all that can be controlled within your AMS. Okay. And so I attended a Litmus conference, right? Litmus is that rendering tool that allows you to view, your email and different email clients. And a guy at MailChimp did a talk, and he talked about opt-outs, and opt-outs not necessarily being a bad thing, right? And it was like a light bulb went off, and looking at opt-outs as the glass half full, right? And so when I was working at the association, opt-outs was like, oh my goodness, the world has ended, right? Like the fact that somebody opted out of our communication was like the path to that person not renewing membership almost, right? And so we looked at that really negatively. And so this guy, the presenter, was saying that, actually they're engaging with you correctly, right? And there's a lot of things that you can do with the data, with the opt-out data. I mean, yeah, maybe there is something that you are doing wrong, but it gives you good insight to make improvements for the future, right? So maybe you're sending emails too frequently. Maybe the content is just not really matching up to this person's interest. So maybe you need to rethink your email strategy, right? And so looking at opt-outs shouldn't always be a negative thing. It can actually be a positive thing to help improve your marketing strategy. And sometimes you may get on autopilot and just start sending these things, but looking at those opt-outs and kind of gauging your email strategy can actually really boost your marketing. And at the end of the day, you either want more people to come to your events, to be engaged in some of your legislative activities, or generate more members, right? And so with those three things, if you can, look at some data to help you improve upon those three things, I think opt-outs is kind of a good, barometer to kind of gauge where you're at and figure out how you can make improvements so that you can increase those other things. So here's an example of opting out, right? I think sometimes we fail to survey our customers on opt-out, right? So here's an example where you can say, hey, give us some feedback, right? Like, you're opting out, but there must be a reason why you're opting out. And so this customer said, I'm receiving emails too frequently, right? So here we can now look at all this data. Imagine if you got 50 people that said they receive emails too frequently, right? So then you need to rethink your strategy. You may want to, institute some type of marketing strategy where you're doing newsletters to allow them to subscribe to a frequency so that you can send on a monthly basis or a weekly basis or a daily basis, right? And so here, it's required to opt out. You just get a quick survey and allow them to kind of provide you some feedback, and I think this feedback is really good to help improve your marketing strategy. And you can also offer additional channels, right? So the new generation that's coming up next, email may not be their primary way of communication, right? Or even now, like, I prefer Twitter, right? So I get a lot of my news and everything via Twitter, not necessarily via email. And I hover in that millennials / Generation X kind of generation, so I'm a tweener, if you will. But I like Facebook too as well, but I like to get my news via Twitter, right? And so versus email. And so if I opt out of a communication and I saw that, hey, let me subscribe to their Twitter feed, I would probably do that, right? So giving them another option to communicate is probably, just saying that, lingering on the fact that, somebody's just opting out, you might be able to offer additional channels so that you can still communicate with them on a consistent basis and interact with them on a consistent basis. And so once they click, I want to subscribe to your Twitter feed, you can actually do some creative things via the API and store that Twitter account into your AMS, and now you have their Twitter handle or their Facebook handle or their LinkedIn page. And now with Twitter, you can actually do a DM message to them and direct message and contact them and engage with them, right? So there's things that you can do to kind of add on to the fact that people are opting out, but you're offering up, additional channels that might be the primary channel in the future, right? All right, so that is kind of UX design, right? That was all the things that you can do within the EPC to kind of build a better user experience and kind of leverage data within the AMS and deliver personalized experiences on the EPC, and with the hopes that, engaging more on the EPC keeps them and retains them so that they're not completely opting out. But in addition to that, opting out may not be a bad thing, right? That you can offer up additional channels and or survey them to get additional data so that you can make improvements in the future. And so we're switching gears a little bit and saying, okay, so now we got that EPC, it's powerful, it's beautiful, but let's go beast mode with the data that we're getting back from the EPC, right? We're collecting all that data. Imagine the data that Home Depot is leveraging now that I filled out that interest, right? Now that I said that I'm intermediate and I'm interested in, tiling, painting, and, woodworking, I'm going to get specific, communications that are straightforward to my interests, right? And so that's where we get into, what I like to call beast mode, right? So this is some really cool things. Is you're leveraging that power. That's, that data. To me, data is power, right? So that you're leveraging that data within the AMS. And so what this does, I think, like I said before, you got your advocacy efforts, you got your events, right, and then you got your membership. Those are the three areas that I see mostly with associations. And so you really want to build those up, right? And so engagement is kind of, the key component to all those three things. So if you got an engaged audience and they're loyal to you, obviously you're going to have strong advocacy efforts, right? So when you send out an alert that, a certain bill that's on the hill, they're going to react to it. But there might be a constituent base that doesn't necessarily adhere to some of the advocacy efforts, right? There may be people that are in your association just for the professional development piece, and really kind of like are kind of not necessarily government affairs advocacy people. So you got a core group of people that are very strong advocates for you. So you send them messages and they react right away, right? And so that engagement, you're leveraging that power within your AMS to know what your constituents look like and what they like, right? So that you're disseminating messages to them so that they can react on your behalf, right? And so that second bullet point, high value content marketing, right? So that content that they're getting, it feeds into their interest, and so that they're reacting on your behalf. And so that's the power within the data. And so what you can do with this data is a number of things, right? You can trigger routine emails in campaigns, right? So you can go with the marketing automation approach where you have interest, you have some behaviors, and you're now triggering certain campaigns while you work and do, more important things than teeing up emails in the platform, right? You let the technology do that, right? We got to a point where we can do a number of things in code now. So let the technology do that, right? You got some things, strategy, and different things that computers really can't do. Let the the routine tasks, let the computer do the work for you, right? And so with certain behaviors that people, if somebody goes and downloads a white paper from your website, that triggers an email communication to the person that offers them up a webinar that they can attend based on that similar taxonomy, right? So what you're going to have is this one shared taxonomy structure now. And you have your CMS and you have your AMS, and they're going to kind of parallel with each other on a taxonomy basis. So if you have certain interests that are on your website, all of that interest will be inside your AMS as a topic code or opt-in interest and so forth. But that interest that's in your AMS will also be a taxonomy on your CMS. Now, there's different CMSs out there, from Drupal, WordPress to Sitecore, and so forth. I haven't seen one that doesn't have a tagging mechanism. They all do, right? So tagging your content mirrors up to the same data that's in your AMS, and now you really start to leverage technology to kind of disseminate some messages again while you work, right? And then what happens, what you realize is that you're not sending as frequent emails, right? You're consolidating a lot of the communications that you're sending to your constituents, right? And so this is all derives around the email preference center, with the user specifying exactly what they want to receive, and now you're consolidating the communications, and you're eliminating that frequency that the customer may be complaining about and opting out, and the reason why they're opting out. And so I think automation is the future in the way that we work, and allowing these marketing campaigns to run on their own is by far. I mean, I wish I had it when I was at Western Growers. I think it would have saved me a lot of time. I was always either creating a list or teeing up a specific email, and so to have lack of a better word, a robot or something that our code do the work for you is awesome, right? And so frequency, and I was just speaking on this, right, is one of the key reasons to opt out. I think it was over 50% of the reasons why people opt out is because of frequency. And so with a automation approach, you can honor this on the EPC, right? You can ask this question: how do you want to receive updates, right? You could say, I want to receive them daily, weekly, monthly, and so you can aggregate those news stories, those newsletters into these frequency segments, and then allow the integration to disseminate those for you. And so this was one of the hardest things to honor, I think, without automation, right? I think you thought about putting this on your email preference center, but to be honest, there's no way you can really keep up with honoring weekly or daily, newsletters. You're sending out a newsletter each day. It's too difficult, right? So automation is the key to making this element happen on an email preference center. All right, and so when I was talking about, high-value content, right, you're generating these hyper-personalized emails. So you have your AMS and then you have your CMS. So it sounded real similar. AMS, and your association management system, and your CMS, your content management system. You have the stories in there. You have the data inside your AMS. And what you're doing is having a shared taxonomy so that you can deliver high-value content to that constituent based on the interests that they specified on the email preference center. I think this is a really awesome approach, right? And it goes back to that Home Depot example of me receiving, content that I want to receive based on what I specified my interests were at Home Depot. And I don't think it's any different than what a lot of our clients and a lot of other associations have in place already in terms of collecting those interests. It's just now the time to kind of just get in there and figure out how you can marry up your taxonomy structure with your website and those interests within your AMS. And it is work to the front end of that. You're going to spend some time reevaluating, the interests and the taxonomy structure, but it's well worth it, right? Because at the end of the day, you're having a system send out those messages for you, and so that front end work is there's a reward to that, and you can let things run on its own, and the automation feature is really cool and awesome. All right, so not only can you have a hyper-personalized email, you can have a hyper-personalized website too, right? So imagine those preferences that I specified on the email preference center. Now I can tailor the message, the experience on the website as well, right? And I'm talking about your actual website with all the content on it, right? So imagine if a user logs into that website, or you don't even have to do the login. Sometimes you can use cookies. That's getting a little too technical, but there's ways to navigate around the login as well. But imagine if the user goes to your website and now they have a unique, bespoke, experience on the site, right? And so if I go to Home Depot and I go to their blog, now I'm gonna have intermediate and DIY articles that are specific to what I'm trying to do, right? Painting, woodworking, and so forth, and it removes all of the excess, right? I can now focus on the elements that I want to see on the website. So you can deliver some of these high valued, content on the web as well, not just via email, right? And so I think that's an awesome approach to delivering a user experience to your membership and keeping them engaged, because now you're giving them exactly what they want. What they're getting in the email and what they're getting on the website is kind of one and the same, and so that experience is carried over to the website. And so where I see the future of email preference center is kind of like Netflix, right? If you've ever used Netflix, Netflix is kind of an online streaming system where you can view movies online or on some type of device. And what they've built is a really high quality, tailored experience on the web. And what their preference center is not necessarily a preference center. It's they call it your taste, right? What your tastes are. And so you go in here and you select, you kind of rank the different movies, and then they start to deliver through the UI, the user interface, movies that they think you're interested in based upon how you ranked certain movies. So Big, being a 80s baby, right? I really love Big. That's like one of my favorite movies. I rank it 5, and so, movies similar to Big will appear in my feed, or movies featuring Tom Hanks will appear in my feed. And so you have this kind of algorithm that's kind of determining what my interests are based upon certain actions that I have done. I've either watched Big or watched Ice Age, so now I'm getting similar movies along those lines. And so I really think, you know, preference centers are going to go into this area where people have no need to go to an email preference center per se, that we're already doing that in the back end based upon some of the actions that's already created. You know, they purchased this webinar, they downloaded this document, so now we can build an algorithm around that to say, okay, this person is interested in these things. And imagine this, maybe the preference center looks similar to this. Maybe you have, you know, 4 articles along the page, and the user comes to this page and says, yeah, I read this article, you know, I liked it a lot. Oh, I didn't like this article. I liked that article. I didn't like this article. And now you can build an experience on the web and via email to the user to build around an algorithm and say, okay, we're going to deliver this person this type of content based upon the selection that they specified on the preference center. And so I think that's the future of email preference centers. It's really, you know, determining user interest based on prior actions. I think that's where we're headed. I think because right now we have so much data. I think your AMS can track these things. There's so many APIs out there, and you know, you can integrate pretty much anything nowadays. And so having, you know, behavioral actions from the web, behavioral actions from your email, behavioral actions from social media, combining all of those things, as well as selections on the email preference center that may look different in the future. I think we can really build some robust algorithms to kind of deliver high-value content to the constituents. And so to kind of recap, you know, pretty much today, it's really kind of leveraging. We kind of evolved, right? We went from this email preference center that was merely to comply with CAN-SPAM or CASL, right? It's really a mechanism to kind of deselect, you know, your preferences and prevent opt-outs, right? But I think now we've evolved into an era where we can now develop some really sophisticated systems to deliver high-value content to your constituents. And with that in mind, you're now keeping engagement within your membership. And like I said, with the engagement, you're boosting those things like advocacy. You're boosting those things like your event attendance and your membership, right? And so as long as they're engaged into your organization, those things will succeed. And so that is now kind of what the email preference center is about. It's really about engaging your constituents and finding the content that is really valued to them and honoring that, right? And doing that on an automated basis so that you're not having to deploy, you know, messages every single day, right? You are allowing the system or some type of script to kind of deploy those messages for you. So I'm pretty sure we got a few questions, so you know, feel free to ask any questions in the chat window.